The way we interact with healthcare is really changing fast. And one of the super exciting areas is how AI, artificial intelligence, could maybe help doctors out with diagnosis.
Yeah, definitely. It's less science fiction these days.
Right. Imagine like an AI system that could actually listen to your symptoms, maybe offer some useful insight, almost like having this, I don't know, super smart assistant doctor on call.
Well, that future is getting closer, I think.
Yeah.
We've already seen some pretty amazing steps in conversational AI for medicine. There are systems out there already, that can chat with patients via text and even show diagnostic skills that are pretty close to primary care physicians.
Like AMI, right? That was one of the big early examples.
Exactly, AMIU.
Yeah.
It showed a lot of promise, definitely, in understanding and responding to how patients describe their health problems just through text.
Okay, yeah. But I mean, as cool as those text-only systems are, they hit a wall, don't they?
They do, a pretty significant one.
Think about it. When you see a doctor, it's not just what you say. They look, right? They see a rash or, check an ECG strip, look at lab results.
Oh, the visual information, yeah.
And that's completely missing in a purely text chat, which seems like a huge gap, maybe leading to missed clues or even, I guess, mistakes.
It's a major hurdle, absolutely. And beyond just potential errors, it can actually create real barriers for people.
How so?
Well, think about telehealth access. If you're not great with technology or maybe struggle with the language, trying to describe, say, a weird mole just using words, that's tough.
Yeah, I can see that. It could definitely make existing health gaps even wider.
Precisely. And it's kind of ironic because we're all using our phones constantly, right?
Yeah.
Sending photos, documents.
All the time. People message doctors with pictures already, I bet.
They do. The research paper actually mentions this. We use messaging apps for quick consults, sharing photos, maybe a PDF of a test result. But the AI, on the other end, it hasn't really been built to properly see and understand all that multimodal data within the flow of a conversation. So the ability of these big language models to, ask for, interpret, and actually reason about images, ECGs, documents during a medical chat, that's been, largely unexplored territory until this recent work.
Okay, let's dive into that then, because this is the core of our deep dive today, right? Multimodal AME.
That's the one.
And this isn't just like a slightly better chatbot. This sounds like a pretty big jump. It builds on the original AME, but gives it eyes, essentially. The ability to perceive and make sense of different kinds of medical data.
Exactly. Those skin photos we mentioned, ECG patterns, clinical documents, it's designed to handle those within the conversation.
All trying to mimic how a seasoned clinician would work, especially remotely, like in telehealth.
That's the goal, yeah. To emulate that experienced clinical reasoning in a telehealth context. And this big step forward comes from dedicated research. Our main source today is a specific research paper published May 1st, 2025. It's from a team at Google DeepMind and Google Research, and it introduces this multimodal AMIE, detailing how they built it and, importantly, how they tested it really thoroughly.
Got it. So our mission for this deep dive is to really get under the hood of this research paper. We want to figure out how multimodal AME actually pulls off this integration of different data types.
How it works, yeah.
And how the researchers tested it, what hoops did they make it jump through, and crucially, what do their findings tell us about where AI in medical diagnosis might be heading? It feels potentially transformative.
It certainly could be. We'll be digging deep into the paper's core contributions and what it all means.
Okay, let's start back with that basic problem. Why text alone just isn't enough for medical diagnosis? The paper really stresses this, right?
It does. And it's not just about missing visual clues leading to errors, though that's obviously huge. It's also fundamentally about equity.
Right, the access issue you mentioned.
Yeah. For someone, say, with lower digital literacy or maybe a language barrier, a text-heavy interface is it's an obstacle. Trying to describe a complex visual symptom accurately in text, or even knowing what details matter.
That's a really good point. Meanwhile, we're also used to just snapping a photo and sending it. It's second nature.
Exactly. We communicate visually all the time now. And the paper points out these multimedia messaging apps, they're already being used for remote clinical chats. Patients and doctors are swapping this kind of data already.
But the AI hasn't caught up.
Right. While the data sharing is happening, the underlying sophisticated AI models, the LLMs, haven't really been designed to handle it smoothly and conversationally. So this research tackles that gap head on. developing and really rigorously evaluating multimodal AME.
Okay, so how does it work? What's the tech inside multimodal AME that lets it handle, say, a photo and text?
So it builds on the original AME's architecture, but integrates what the researchers call multimodal medical perception. And this perception part is powered by Gemini 2.0 Flash. That's the underlying AI model, giving it the ability to, see and interpret the visual stuff.
Gotcha. Gemini 2.0 Flash handles the seeing.
But the really novel part, the core innovation highlighted in the paper, is this thing they call a state-aware framework.
State-aware. Okay, break that down. What does state-aware mean here? Is it like remembering the conversation?
It's much more active than just remembering. Think of it like a detective building a case.
Okay.
As the detective gathers clues, symptoms from the patient, maybe an image they share, test results, they're constantly updating their understanding of the whole situation. That's the state.
The current understanding of the case.
Exactly. And that evolving understanding, that state, directly influences what questions they ask next, what evidence they seek out.
Okay, I get it.
So this state-aware framework lets AMIE do something similar. It dynamically gathers info, interprets it, including the multimodal stuff like images, ECGs, documents, and reasons about it, all during the clinical chat.
So it's not just processing data points separately, it's weaving them together.
Right. And the goal, again, is to really copy that iterative diagnostic process a skilled human doctor uses, especially over telehealth.
Wow, okay. That sounds complex to build, let alone test. How on earth did they evaluate if this actually works well?
The evaluation was seriously thorough. They ran a randomized, blinded human evaluation. Basically, they designed it to mimic something called an OSCE.
Oh, I see.
Objective Structured Clinical Examination. It's a standard practical test used everywhere in medical training and for licensing, assessing real clinical skills.
Okay, like a practical exam for doctors.
Exactly. But they adapted it for this virtual setting. They had AME go head-to-head with actual primary care physicians interacting via text-based chat.
Blinded, you said. So the patient didn't know if they were talking to the AI or a human doctor.
Correct. And importantly, these weren't just simple chats. The scenarios were specifically designed to involve multimodal data skin photos, ECG readouts, clinical documents.
So a pretty realistic simulation. A chat interface, but with the ability to share and view these crucial medical images or files.
Precisely. Both the AI and the human doctors got the same patient info, including those key visual elements.
And the results from that comparison are a big part of this research paper we're digging into.
A central part, absolutely. It provides really strong evidence about its capabilities.
Okay, so let's talk about the key contributions then. What were the big breakthroughs or the aha moments from this research that we should really focus on?
Well, the paper outlines several really significant ones. First, and maybe the most foundational, is developing and actually implementing that multimodal, state-aware reasoning framework.
The detective brain part.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
They detailed this novel dialogue phase transition framework. It basically acts like a conductor, orchestrating the flow of the whole conversation.
Okay.
It moves the conversation through 3 clear phases. First, history taking.
Makes sense.
Then diagnosis and management.
Yeah.
And finally, answering follow-up questions.
So just like a real doctor's visit, pretty much. Hister, figure out the problem and plan, then wrap up any loose ends.
Exactly. And the key is, within each phase, AMI maintains this internal state.
Right.
Which isn't just a log of the chat. It's a dynamic, evolving understanding of the patient, their symptoms, the AI's current best guesses about what might be wrong, the differential diagnosis, and importantly, what it doesn't know yet.
The knowledge gaps.
Yes. And this state gets constantly updated based on the chat history and any multimodal data, like an uploaded photo that comes in.
And crucially, this internal state then tells AMI what to do next, like what question to ask or when to ask for that photo.
Precisely that. It guides AMI's actions. It helps it decide to ask a targeted question or strategically request a specific piece of multimodal data, a skin image, an ECG, a document right when it's most likely to be helpful.
Okay.
Then it interprets the findings from that data and seamlessly weaves that new understanding back into the conversation. It uses it to refine its diagnostic ideas and figure out where to probe next.
So it's actively seeking information, not just passively receiving it.
That's a key emphasis in the paper. It emulates the structured yet flexible reasoning that experienced doctors use in telemedicine. It's not just, an image, let me process it. It's, based on this symptom, seeing the rationale would really help clarify things.
That's really cool. So it's not just, can it see the image, but does it know when and why to ask for it and how to use that info? Okay, fascinating. What was the second big contribution?
The second one was developing a comprehensive simulation environment, specifically for evaluating these complex multimodal chats.
Ah, the testing ground you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. The researchers knew they needed a way to rapidly test and improve the system. Human evaluations like the OSCE are vital, but they take a lot of time and resources.
Right, you can't run thousands of OSCEs easily.
So they built this sophisticated framework for doing automated assessments. Fast iteration.
How did that work? How do you automate simulating a realistic patient-doctor chat, especially with images involved?
It's a three-step process they describe. First, they generate very realistic patient scenarios.
Okay.
These include detailed patient profiles, symptoms, history, and crucially, those multimodal artifacts like skin photos from real medical data sets, ECG traces.
So creating virtual patients with visual evidence.
Yes, and they even used other AI models like Gemini with web search to add plausible clinical context to make the scenarios feel even more real.
Okay, step one, create the virtual patient and their data. What's next?
Step two is simulating the actual turn-by-turn multimodal dialogue. They have an AMIE agent instructed to be empathetic and clinically accurate interact with a patient agent.
An AI playing the patient.
Yes, programmed to stick strictly to the scenario, answering based on the generated symptoms and history. And because it's multimodal, the AMIE agent can request and see those simulated images or documents during the chat.
Okay, so AI doctor talks to AI patient, exchanging text and images based on a script. What's the final step? How do they know if the chat was any good?
Step three is the auto-rater agent. This is another specialized AI whose job is to evaluate the quality of that simulated dialogue.
Judging the AI doctor's performance.
Exactly. It scores the conversation against preset clinical criteria. Things like, was the diagnosis accurate compared to the scenario's ground truth?
Makes sense.
How effective was the information gathering? Did it ask the right questions? Was the proposed management plan appropriate and safe? And critically, did it hallucinate? Did it make up any information?
Wow, okay, so they could run tons of these simulations and get automated scores on AME's performance across key clinical factors. That must have been super helpful for tuning the system.
Hugely valuable for development and refinement, yes.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a third key contribution.
I did. The third one brings us back to the human element, that rigorous expert evaluation using the multimodal virtual OSCE.
Right, the head-to-head comparison.
It wasn't just about automated scores. They designed and ran this remote OSCE study with 105 different carefully crafted case scenarios. And in each one, they had validated patient actors, real people trained to portray patients realistically having these live text-based chats.
With either AME or a real primary care physician.
Right. And crucially, it was blinded. The actor didn't know if they were chatting with the AI or a person, and the interface let them upload those multimodal artifacts, like the skin photos, if requested.
Just like a real telehealth interaction might happen.
So real people acting as patients, interacting with both the AI and human doctors in realistic situations involving visual medical data, that adds a really crucial layer of real-world validation beyond the simulations.
Absolutely. It's a much more direct test of its practical utility.
And the final contribution was the actual comparison, seeing how AMEs stacked up against these practicing PCPs.
Exactly. And the results here were quite striking. The evaluation showed that AMIE's ability to handle and interpret that multimodal data within the conversation was, on the whole, superior or at least non-inferior to the primary care physicians.
Superior or non-inferior. So as good as or potentially better than the human doctors in handling the visual data aspect.
In that specific aspect, yes. And interestingly, AIE also scored higher on other important consultation quality metrics.
Like what?
Like diagnostic accuracy overall, the quality of the reasoning behind its management plans, and even perceived empathy, according to the patient actors.
Wow. Okay, that is a compelling set of findings. It really does suggest multimodal AIE is a significant step. Let's dig a bit more into that state-aware reasoning. You mentioned 3 phases: history taking, diagnosis and management, and follow-up questions. Can you flesh out what happens in each?
Sure. So phase 1, history taking. This is where the system starts building and then constantly updating a structured patient profile.
Like a dynamic patient chart.
Pretty much. It captures the chief complaint, history of the illness, demographics, symptoms, past medical history, family history, meds, all the standard stuff.
Right.
Plus, it keeps a running list of info it still needs. And importantly, during this phase, ANIE also starts generating an internal list of possible diagnoses, the differential diagnosis, or DDX, based on what it's hearing.
But it doesn't tell a patient that list yet.
No, not at this stage. It's an internal working hypothesis list.
Okay, so it's building this picture, considering possibilities. How does it know when it's got enough info to move on? Stop asking history questions.
That's a really smart part of the state-aware framework.
Yeah.
There's a specific decision point built in. Another module also using Gemini 2.0 Flash basically assesses, do I have enough data now to make a reasonable guess at the diagnosis, or do I need to ask more specific questions? And that decision considers the whole chat history so far, plus that internal list of potential diagnoses. It's iterative too. Yeah. Meaning as the patient answers more questions or uploads that photo, that new info immediately gets fed back in. The profile updates, the internal diagnosis list might change, a summary gets refreshed.
Constantly learning and refining.
Exactly. And once that module decides, okay, we have sufficient info, then it transitions smoothly to phase 2, diagnosis and management.
Okay, that makes sense. You don't want it jumping the gun. So what happens in phase 2, diagnosis and management?
Right. So here the focus shifts to turning all that gathered info into an actionable plan. First, the patient profile might get a final tweak based on any last details. Then there's a subphase where it basically validates the differential diagnosis.
Firms up its best guesses.
Yeah. Reviews and ranks those possibilities based on all the evidence, including any interpreted images or documents. Then it formulates the management plan.
The treatment strategy.
Right. Based on the history, the profile, the validated DDX, it figures out recommendations, maybe investigations, tests, treatments. And finally, it delivers this plan to the patient.
How does it do that? Just dump it all at once?
No, usually iteratively over a few conversational turns. This gives the patient a chance to ask questions, raise concerns. Presenting the refined diagnosis and the plan clearly signals a move towards the final phase.
Which is phase 3, answering follow-up questions.
Exactly. Here, the profile might still get minor updates, but the main goal is addressing any lingering questions the patient has about the plan, making sure they understand everything.
And it can refer back to the images here, if needed.
Yes, absolutely. If a question relates to the ECG tracing they uploaded, for instance, AMIE can reference its findings from that artifact to clarify. The chat continues until the patient's questions are answered, the plan is clear, and they reach a natural end to the consultation.
Okay. And then it's done. The interaction just stops.
The conversation stops, yes. But AMIE then does something important post-dialogue.
Oh, what's that?
It automatically generates a structured post-consultation questionnaire. This basically summarizes the whole interaction in a clinically useful format for records or review.
Ah, creating the official notes.
Kind of. It uses the full dialogue history and its final internal state, the final profile, the final ranked DDX, the detailed management plan. It's prompted to finalize that ranked diagnosis list, most likely condition plus alternatives. And it formulates a detailed management plan, drawing on current medical knowledge, maybe even using web search to ensure recommendations align with guidelines.
So specifying things like follow-up timing or when to seek urgent care.
Exactly. In-person visits, tests to order, patient instructions, escalation criteria, follow-up needs, rationale. It's all structured in that output.
That's incredibly thorough. It's not just chatting, it's documenting and synthesizing in a clinically robust way. Okay, let's shift back to the automated evaluations you mentioned. How did they set those up?
Right, the framework for rapid testing. It had two main parts. First, evaluating the base model's raw perception skills on isolated medical artifacts.
Just seeing if it could see accurately.
Pretty much. And second, using that simulation environment we talked about to auto-rate entire multimodal diagnostic conversations.
Okay, let's start with the perception tests. Why test that separately from the whole chat?
Because accurate perception is the absolute foundation. The researchers stress this. If the AI can't reliably understand the visual info it's given, the fanciest conversation skills won't help much.
Garbage in, garbage out, basically.
Essentially, yes. So they needed to check if the base model, Gemini 2.0 Flash, could reliably see and interpret these common medical artifacts, smartphone skin pics, ECGs, clinical documents.
Were they asking it to make diagnoses just from the images in these tests?
Not necessarily complex diagnoses in isolation. The main goal here was more foundational. Could the model reliably pick out key visual features? Could it extract basic clinical information from these different formats? It was about ensuring solid perceptual grounding.
Okay, so what kinds of tasks did they give it?
For skin images, using data sets like SCIN, they tested if it could describe lesion features, shape, color, distribution. For ECGs, using datasets like PTB-XL and ECG-QA, they might ask for likely diagnoses based on the tracing or answer specific questions about the ECG findings.
And for documents.
They actually created their own data set for that, clinical doc QA. It involved asking questions based on de-identified clinical notes and patient records, testing its comprehension of medical text in document form.
Right. And did Gemini 2.0 flash past these perception tests?
Yes. The paper details the results, showing it performed well enough across these tasks to give them confidence in its basic perceptual abilities. This foundational check was crucial before they could confidently explore the impact of combining this perception with full history taking in AMIE.
Makes sense. Gotta walk before you can run. So once they knew it could see reasonably well, they moved on to auto-rating the simulated conversations.
Exactly. Using that three-step simulation process we covered, generate the realistic patient scenario, simulate the multimodal dialogue between the AMIE agent and the patient agent, and then unleash the auto-rater agent.
And what was the auto-rater looking for in those simulated chats?
Several key clinical things. Diagnostic accuracy, obviously, did AM get the right answer based on the scenario? Or the appropriateness of the management plan it proposed, rated on a Likert scale, checking if it matched best practices. The effectiveness of its information gathering, did it ask good questions? And that critical safety check. Hallucination detection, did it make stuff up?
So this automated setup gave them a way to quickly assess AMIE's performance on multiple clinical dimensions in simulated scenarios.
Yes, very valuable for iterating and improving the system. And they specifically note this goes way beyond older text-only simulation frameworks by properly incorporating the multimodal scenarios and interactions. They even calibrated the auto-rater against human expert evaluations to make sure its judgments were reliable.
Okay, now let's circle back one more time to the expert evaluation, that multimodal virtual OSCE with the human actors. How did they actually score the performance of AMIE versus the PCPs in those chats?
It was multi-layered. First, right after each chat, whether with AMIE or a doctor, the patient actors filled out detailed questionnaires.
Getting the patient's perspective.
Exactly. Using validated tools that measure consultation quality from the patient's view, things like, did they feel listened to? Was the explanation clear? Empathy, overall satisfaction.
Important factors in real healthcare.
Absolutely. At the same time, right after the chat, both AMIE and the human doctor had to fill out their own post-consultation questionnaire.
Summarizing their clinical take.
Yes, detailing their differential diagnosis, their full management plan, tests, treatments, escalation criteria, and any key findings from the images or documents they saw.
Okay, so you have the patient's view and the clinician's or AI's summary. Who evaluated all of that?
That's where the specialist physicians came in. A panel of experts, dermatologists, cardiologists, general internists meticulously reviewed everything for each case.
Everything meaning?
The full chat transcript, the questionnaires filled out by the actor and the clinician AI, and the original case details, including the actual correct diagnosis for that scenario.
Wow. Okay.
And they used detailed scoring rubrics, standardized guides to assess performance across a whole range of clinical criteria.
What kind of criteria were the specialists scoring?
Key things like accuracy and quality of the diagnosis list, appropriateness and safety of the management plan, how effective was the patient communication, clinical reasoning skills shown in the chat, and very relevant here, they used a specific newly developed rubric just for evaluating multimodal understanding and handling the MUH score.
Ah, so a dedicated score for how well they dealt with the images and documents.
Precisely. How well did they engage with them, interpret them accurately, and reason based on that visual information during the chat. That was a core focus.
Okay, that makes total sense. This whole setup, automated metrics, patient feedback, and detailed expert review sounds incredibly comprehensive. A really thorough way to assess multimodal AMIE.
It provides a very rich, multifaceted picture of its capabilities, definitely.
So the million-dollar question. After all that rigorous testing, what did they find? How did multimodal AME actually stack up against the real primary care doctors in these head-to-head trials?
Well, the main headline, the big finding, was pretty striking. Multimodal AME generally performed as well as, and in many cases, better than the primary care physicians across a wide range of important clinical aspects.
As well as, or better than. Wow. Okay, break that down a bit. What did the specialists think, and what did the patient actors say?
Okay, so the specialist physicians, they consistently rated AMIE's overall consultations higher, and that held true across dermatology, cardiology, and general practice cases.
Higher overall, what specific areas?
Significantly higher ratings for AMIE on diagnostic accuracy and the quality of its management plans. Also higher scores for the quality of its history taking. And really importantly, AMIE scored significantly higher on that multimodal understanding and handling, the MUH score.
So the experts felt AMIE was better at actually using the visual data effectively in the consultation.
That's what the findings suggest, yes. They found it more proficient at engaging with the images and documents, interpreting them accurately, and clearly explaining those findings back to the patient actor.
Okay, that's huge, given the whole point was multimodal integration. What about the patient actors? What was their experience like?
Their feedback was also really interesting. They rated AMIE significantly higher on how well it addressed the intent of their questions about the images or documents they shared.
Interesting phrasing. Addressing the intent.
Yeah, and also higher on how clearly AMIE explained the clinical findings from that visual evidence. The paper shares this great little anecdote.
Oh, yeah.
Where a patient actor uploaded photos of a rash. AMIE explicitly described the key features it saw in the photos and connected them back to the symptoms the actor had mentioned earlier.
Okay.
But when the same actor saw a human PCP in a separate blinded chat for the same case, the doctor didn't specifically mention the images in their explanation, even though they presumably looked at them. And the feedback suggested patients really value that explicit verbalization. It's like, okay, you really saw and understood the picture I sent. It builds confidence.
That makes total sense. Feeling seen, literally. Okay, what about pure diagnostic accuracy? Who is better at getting the right diagnosis?
On average, across all the cases, AMIE outperformed the primary care physicians in diagnostic accuracy, and that was statistically significant.
Better accuracy overall? Did they look at why?
They did some subgroup analyses. One interesting finding was related to misreporting or hallucinating image findings. While mistakes hurt accuracy for both AMIE and the PCPs, it actually hurt the PCP's accuracy more.
Why would that be?
The paper suggests AMIE might be slightly more resilient, perhaps better able to overcome an initial visual misstep and still reach the right conclusion through its structured reasoning process. But that's just a hypothesis.
Fascinating nuance, though. It's not just about perfect perception, but how errors are handled in the overall reasoning. You mentioned AMIE's robust multimodal handling skills were confirmed, too.
Yes, the specialist MUH scores really back that up. Across the board, specialists found AMIE significantly better at engaging with, interpreting, and communicating about the visual artifacts compared to the human doctors in the study. It's strong validation for the systems designed for telehealth.
And the underlying Gemini 2.0 Flash model, its basic perception was solid.
Yes, those initial perception tests confirmed it had robust capabilities for derm images and clinical documents and adequate performance on ECG benchmarks. That foundational capability was key.
You also mentioned an ablation study about history taking. What did that show?
Right, they wanted to isolate the value of the conversation itself. So they compared diagnosis based only on the images versus diagnosis using the full multimodal AMIE system, images plus dialogue plus reasoning. The results were clear. Adding the dialogue and history taking significantly boosted diagnostic accuracy compared to just looking at the image alone. It really highlights that AMIE integrates information from both sources. It doesn't just process images separately.
Yeah, just like a real doctor needs the story and the visual evidence. Makes sense. Lastly, you mentioned it was robust to variations in how patients presented.
Yes, they used AI to subtly change patient scenarios, altering personality traits, demographics, specific wording. They found AMIE's performance on the key auto-rater metrics stayed consistently high, suggesting it's pretty robust to these kinds of natural variations in patient presentation.
Okay, so overall, a pretty compelling case from the research. What were the big discussion points the researchers themselves drew from all this? What are the broader implications?
Well, they really emphasized the successful integration adding multimodal perception didn't mess up the conversational quality. It flowed naturally.
That's important.
They highlighted AMIE's strong, often superior performance against PCPs in those tough OSCE scenarios. They pointed to the state-aware reasoning as the key mechanism enabling it to handle multimodal data midstream while keeping the dialogue sound and empathetic.
Right, that dynamic updating.
They also stressed the relevance of the tested modalities, smartphone pics, documents, ECGs. These are things actually used in telehealth today.
Practical relevance.
Definitely. And they circle back to the positive feedback from both the specialists on artifact handling, interpretation, reasoning, and the patient actors on explaining visual findings clearly.
Yeah, the making patients feel seen aspect.
Exactly. They also noted the study was designed so the multimodal info was usually necessary for a confident diagnosis, which was supported by the fact that accuracy dropped for both AME and PCPs when image quality was poor, or there were reasoning errors about the images.
So the visual data really mattered in the test cases. Of course, no study is perfect. What limitations or ongoing challenges did the researchers acknowledge?
They were upfront about several things. The chat-only format obviously lacks nonverbal cues and any physical exam capability. That's a big difference from in-person care. There was a potential risk of unblinding, though they tried to minimize it. And looking ahead, big challenges remain. Handling the sheer variety and messiness of real-world medical data. Developing even better ways to fuse information from different sources. And all the critical ethical stuff.
Like bias in the AI.
Bias, fairness, equity of access, patient privacy, data security, making the AI's reasoning understandable, interpretability, all huge ongoing areas. They also mentioned this research focused mainly on inference time improvements, making the AI smarter during the chat. Future work might look at specialized training to boost performance further. And finally, they noted their state-based approach aligns well with research on how human doctor-patient conversations naturally flow in phases.
So great promise, but still very much a work in progress with big questions remaining.
Absolutely. But this paper definitely marks a significant milestone in that progress.
Okay, let's wrap up this deep dive. What are the absolute key takeaways listeners should hold on to from our discussion on multimodal AME and this research paper?
I think the main thing is that multimodal AME really represents a major step forward for conversational diagnostic AI. It shows it's possible to effectively integrate and reason about visual medical data alongside text, getting past the limits of text-only systems.
And it didn't just work in theory, it performs strongly, often better than primary care physicians, in these simulated but realistic clinical scenarios, evaluated by both specialists and patient actors.
Exactly. Which has potentially huge implications for improving telehealth, making it more accessible, potentially more accurate, especially when seeing something is crucial for diagnosis.
But we also have to remember the caveats, the challenges still ahead, the need for more research, more rigorous testing, and careful thought about ethics and implementation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
AI in healthcare is moving incredibly fast, and systems like this are right at the cutting edge, pushing what's possible. It's exciting, but needs careful navigation.
So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on after this. As AI like this gets more sophisticated and telehealth becomes even more common, how might these systems truly reshape our interactions with healthcare? And how might they change how empowered we feel as patients? It really pushes us to think about that balance, the incredible power of technology versus the essential human touch and care.